The howl of the wind carried no mercy as it swept across the Dakota plains, driving snow like tiny daggers against any living thing that dared stand in its path. Among the twisted wreckage of 5 wagons, Hannah Miller lay half buried in white, her blood seeping crimson into the snow beneath her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The massacre had been swift. Sioux raiders, the others had, screamed. But Hannah knew better. She had seen the blue coats just before the first shots rang out, had noticed how they kept their distance until the deed was done. As consciousness faded in and out like the weak winter sun, her hands clutched protectively around her swollen belly. 7 months along, the child within her kicked fiercely, as if demanding its mother fight to keep them both alive. "I'm trying. Little one," she whispered through cracked lips, the words immediately stolen by the wind. "Joseph would want us to live." But her husband lay 15 feet away, his body already disappearing beneath the relentless snowfall, his eyes forever fixed on a sky that promised only more cold. Night was coming, and with it, Hannah Miller knew, almost certainly, death. What she didn't know was that eyes were watching her from the ridge, dark, careful eyes that had witnessed the entire slaughter and recognized it for what it truly was. Thomas Blackfeather, scout of the Lakota people, adjusted his buffalo hide and began his descent into the Valley of the Dead. The wagon train had left Independence 6 weeks earlier, a collection of 12 families bound for the promise of free land in Dakota territory. Hannah and Joseph Miller had joined late, their wagons smaller than most, their possessions fewer. They carried little except the child growing within Hannah's womb, and Joseph's unwavering belief that the West would give their unborn child opportunities the crowded East could never provide. "It'll be different there," he'd promised, his calloused hand resting gently on her growing belly. "No one will care that we started with nothing. We'll build something worthy of this little one." Hannah had believed him. She always did. Joseph Miller might have been born poor, the son of Irish immigrants who died of fever before he turned 12, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that made even wealthy men listen when he spoke. It was what had drawn her to him against her father's wishes. That, and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, like he held some gentle secret just for her. Now those eyes would never open again. Thomas Blackfeather approached the woman cautiously, not wanting to startle her if she still lived. The snow had started falling harder, already covering the tracks of those who had done this. Not Sioux, as the white settlers would claim. Thomas had recognized the pattern of the attack, had seen the glint of military brass in the distance. This was the work of men who wore uniforms by day and shed them when darkness fell to become something else entirely. He had been tracking them for 3 days, following their trail of destruction as they eliminated the scattered homesteads and travelers that had ventured too deeply into what the treaties had supposedly guaranteed as Lakota land. Not that treaties meant anything anymore. Thomas knew better than most how the white man's promises turned to smoke when gold was discovered or railroads needed building. Hannah's eyes fluttered open at the crunch of footsteps in snow. Terror surged through her until pain overwhelmed even that. A dark figure loomed above her, features obscured by fur and shadows. She tried to scream, but produced only a rasping wheeze, her hands instinctively tightening around her belly. "I will not harm you," the figure said in careful accented English. "You are dying in this snow, woman. Your child too." Hannah struggled to focus. The man's features resolved into copper skin and eyes black as obsidian, his long hair braided with small tokens she didn't recognize. A knife hung at his side, but his hands were empty, extended toward her in a gesture that somehow conveyed both caution and offer. "Lakota," she whispered, naming what she had been taught to fear. Thomas nodded once. "And you are alone, like me." The simplicity of his words pierced through Hannah's terror. She was indeed alone, her husband dead, her future vanished, her child's life flickering like a candle in wind. The cold had numbed her legs entirely now. She couldn't have run even if she'd wanted to. Death would find her within hours if she remained. "The baby," she managed. "Please, help my baby." Something flickered across Thomas's face. Surprise. Perhaps that she would entrust her child to one she had been raised to consider savage. Or maybe simply recognition of the desperate plea of a mother. He knelt beside her, his movements efficient as he assessed her wounds. A bullet had grazed her side, leaving a bloody furrow through flesh. Not fatal, but infection would follow, if untreated. The greater danger was the cold and her exhaustion. "I can take you to my winter camp," he said, "but it is far. You may not survive the journey." Hannah's gaze drifted to Joseph's still form. Her husband had dreamed of building a home for them, of watching their child grow under western skies. Now those dreams lay shattered, scattered across blood-stained snow. What awaited her if she lived? A military outpost where they would quiz her about Sioux raiders she hadn't seen. A settlement where a pregnant widow would be pitied at best, suspected at worst. But the child moved again within her, demanding a chance at life. "I will try," she whispered. Thomas worked quickly. He gathered what supplies could be salvaged from the wagons: a blanket, a water skin, a small sack of cornmeal. Joseph's hunting knife still sheathed at his belt. He wrapped Hannah in layers of buffalo hide from his own provisions, lifting her with surprising gentleness onto a travois he fashioned from broken wagon parts and leather straps. Hannah said nothing as he worked, her eyes fixed on Joseph's body, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead, knowing she would never see him again. "We should bury him," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Thomas shook his head, gesturing at the frozen ground. "The earth will not open for us now. The snow is his blanket, the sky his witness." He paused, then added, "We will speak his name in my camp so his spirit knows he is remembered." It wasn't the Christian burial Joseph deserved, but Hannah recognized the truth in Thomas's words. The ground was frozen solid. Any attempt to dig would take precious hours they didn't have as the temperature continued to drop. "His name was Joseph Miller," she said. "He was 26 years old. He wanted to build a home for our child." Thomas nodded, accepting the information like a sacred trust. Without another word, he began pulling the travois across the snow, heading northwest toward a horizon already turning purple with approaching night. Hannah closed her eyes, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching Joseph's Bible she'd tucked inside her coat. She prayed, not for salvation, but simply for strength to survive until morning. The journey was agony. Every bump sent shards of pain through Hannah's injured side. The cold penetrated even the layers of hide, seeping into her bones until she shivered uncontrollably. Twice she felt herself drifting into a sleep she instinctively knew would be her last, only to be jolted awake by Thomas's voice, insistent and unyielding. "Tell me of your home," he commanded the first time she began to fade. "The place you left behind." Hannah forced her eyes open, focusing on his broad back as he pulled her through deepening snow. "Pennsylvania," she murmured. "Green hills in a summer. My father's house had 12 rooms and a view of the river." "Why leave such comfort?" Thomas asked, his breathing steady despite his exertion. The question anchored her, giving her mind something to grasp besides pain and cold. "My father disowned me when I married Joseph, said I'd thrown myself away on a penniless dreamer." Thomas made a sound that might have been understanding. Fathers often believe they know best what will bring their children happiness. "He was wrong," Hannah said, and was surprised to find she still believed it even now. Joseph gave me more in our 3 years together than my father's money ever could. They continued this way for what felt like hours, Thomas asking questions whenever. Her responses began to weaken, Hannah answering with memories that kept her tethered to consciousness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She spoke of Joseph's laugh, her mother's garden, the small apartment in Philadelphia where they'd begun their marriage. Thomas shared little in return, but his voice remained a constant, a lifeline she clung to as the cold and pain threatened to drag her under. Night had fully descended when they finally reached the Lakota winter camp. Hannah, delirious with exhaustion, registered only impressions. The glow of fires through hide walls, the sharp bark of dogs quickly silenced, faces peering from teepee entrances with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Words were exchanged in a language she didn't understand, voices rising and falling in what seemed like argument. Thomas's voice cut through them all, firm and resolute. The last thing Hannah remembered before unconsciousness claimed her was being carried into the warmth of a tipi, the scent of herbs and smoke enveloping her, and women's hands, gentle but efficient, removing her frozen clothes. Hannah woke to firelight and the low murmur of female voices. For a disorienting moment, she thought herself back in Pennsylvania, her mother and sisters chatting in the next room. Then pain lanced through her side, and memory crashed back like a physical blow. Joseph, the wagons, the massacre, the Lakota scout who had saved her from certain death. She struggled to sit up, one hand automatically reaching to protect her belly. 2 women knelt beside her, their dark eyes watching her movements with cautious assessment. One was elderly, her face deeply lined, her grey hair braided with small shells that clicked softly when she moved. The other was younger, perhaps Hannah's own age, her expression more openly curious. "The baby?" Hannah asked, her voice cracking with thirst. The older woman spoke in Lakota to her companion, who nodded and poured water from a skin into a carved wooden cup. She helped Hannah drink, supporting her head with surprising strength. "Your child lives," the younger woman said in halting English. "Strong heart, like mother." Relief washed through Hannah, momentarily eclipsing even her grief. She had not failed Joseph in this, at least. Their child still had a chance. She looked around the teepee, taking in the neat arrangement of belongings, the medicines and herbs hanging from the support poles, the comfortable bedding where she lay. "Thomas," she asked. "Speaks with thunder," the younger woman corrected, using what Hannah assumed was Thomas's Lakota name. "He argues with counsel. Many fear bringing white woman here. Bad spirits, they say. White soldiers follow." Fear coiled in Hannah's stomach. If the camp rejected her, where would she go? She couldn't survive alone. Not in her condition. Not in this wilderness. As if sensing her distress, the baby kicked sharply, a reminder of what was at stake. The elderly woman said something in Lakota, her tone scolding. The younger woman looked chastened. "Grandmother says I frighten you with loose tongue," she explained. "She is Rising Bear, our medicine woman. I am Snowflower." She hesitated, then added, "Thomas is her grandson. He would not bring you here if path was not shown to him." Hannah wasn't sure what to make of this information, but she understood its implication. Thomas had risked something by rescuing her. His standing, perhaps, or the safety of his people. She felt a surge of gratitude tinged with guilt. Before she could respond, the teepee flap opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Thomas himself. He looked wearier than when he'd found her, his shoulders tight with tension. Behind him stood a much older man, wrapped in a blanket adorned with intricate beadwork, his face stern beneath an eagle feather worn in his grey hair. "Hannah Miller," Thomas said formally. "This is Chief Running Elk. He leads our winter camp." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The council has decided you may stay until your child is born, and you are strong enough to travel. Then you must go to the white settlement at Pine Ridge." The chief spoke in Lakota, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face. Thomas translated, though Hannah suspected he was softening the older man's words. "He says you bring danger to our people. Blue coats hunt in these hills, claiming they seek Sioux raiders who attack white settlers." Thomas's mouth tightened. "We both know what truly happened to your wagon train. The soldiers who did this will not want witnesses left alive." Hannah felt cold that had nothing to do with the winter outside. "It was soldiers? You're certain?" Thomas nodded grimly. "Colonel William Harper commands Fort Bridger, 3 days' ride from here. He wants our hunting grounds for new settlements. Treaties mean nothing to him." "Why would he attack innocent families?" Hannah asked, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew the answer. Joseph had explained it to her during their journey west, how newspapers back east printed stories of savage attacks to justify military action against tribes who refused to abandon their ancestral lands. "Dead settlers make good stories," Thomas said, confirming her thoughts. "Stories that bring more soldiers, more forts, more guns." He spoke to the chief again in Lakota, receiving a curt nod in response before the older man departed. Once they were alone, except for the two women, Thomas knelt beside Hannah's bedding. "I will teach you our ways while you are here," he said quietly. "How to speak, how to behave. It may save your life and that of your child. Some in the camp will resent your presence. Others will see only a mother in need." Hannah thought of the families she'd traveled with, how they'd spoken of the Lakota and other tribes as obstacles to be removed, savages to be feared or pitied. Yet here she was, alive only because of Lakota mercy. Her own people, men in uniform sworn to protect settlers, had murdered her husband and left her to die. "I will learn," she promised, meeting Thomas's gaze directly. "And I will remember who truly showed humanity when it mattered most." Something like approval flickered in his dark eyes. He rose to leave, but paused at her voice. "Thomas speaks with thunder. Why did you save me? You could have left me to die with the others." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "6 winters ago, my wife died in the snow. She carried our child. There was no one to help them." His voice held no self-pity, only a statement of fact. "The spirits put you in my path. I chose to listen." With that, he was gone, leaving Hannah with Rising Bear and Snowflower. The elderly medicine woman moved to Hannah's side, placing gnarled hands on her swollen belly, her touch surprisingly gentle. She spoke softly in Lakota, the words incomprehensible, but their intent somehow clear. A blessing, a hope, perhaps even a promise. For the first time since the attack, Hannah allowed herself to weep for Joseph, for the future they'd planned together, for the child who would never know its father. Snowflower sat beside her, not offering empty comfort, but simply bearing witness to her grief, while Rising Bear prepared medicines for Hannah's wounds. Outside, the wind continued to howl across the Dakota plains, carrying the secrets of a massacre that would never be properly told in history books. Inside the teepee, surrounded by women she had been taught to fear, Hannah Miller began the painful process of reimagining her world. She had survived when everyone else had perished. Now she needed to understand why and what it would cost her to ensure her child had a future. In the days that followed, Hannah's body began the slow work of healing, while her mind struggled to adapt to her new reality. Rising Bear tended her wound with poultices that smelled of earth and smoke, changing the dressings daily and nodding with satisfaction as infection retreated. Snowflower became Hannah's constant companion, teaching her simple Lakota phrases, explaining camp customs, bringing food and fresh water. Thomas visited each evening, his manner reserved but his attention unwavering as he reported on movements of soldiers in the area. Harper's men had found the wagon train, he told her, and, as expected, blame had been placed squarely on Sioux raiders. A detachment had been dispatched to protect nearby settlements, which primarily meant restricting native movement and searching for winter camps like theirs. "They claim one body is missing," he said on the fifth night, watching her closely. "Yours. They search for you now, claiming concern for a woman taken by savages." Hannah felt sick. "They know I saw them." Thomas nodded. "Harper is no fool. A witness changes everything." "What happens if they find this camp?" she asked, dreading. "The answer." His expression darkened. "They will not find it if we move as planned. The council has decided we break camp in 2 days, traveling further into the Black Hills where the soldiers fear to follow." The prospect of travel in her condition terrified Hannah, but the alternative was worse. If Harper's men found her here, they would execute everyone in the camp and claim a rescue mission gone wrong. The women, the children, the elders, all would die to protect a lie. "I'll be ready," she promised, though Rising Bear had warned through gestures and translated words that too much movement might bring the baby early. That night, after Thomas had gone, Hannah lay awake, listening to the sounds of the camp. Dogs, barking in the distance, the crackle of fires, voices raised in a song she didn't understand, but found oddly comforting. This place that had first seemed so alien was becoming familiar, its rhythms making a strange sort of sense. Snowflower slept nearby, her breathing deep and even. Rising Bear had retired to her own teepee after ensuring Hannah had everything she needed for the night. For the first time since the massacre, Hannah found herself truly alone with her thoughts. She reached under her borrowed blanket for Joseph's Bible, the last tangible connection to her husband. Opening it by firelight, she traced his handwriting. On the inside cover, "To Hannah, my North Star. May we find our promised land together. All my love, Joseph." Tears blurred her vision. There would be no promised land for them now. No homestead built by Joseph's hands, no father to teach their child to walk or read or face the world with dignity. Everything they had planned had died with him in the snow. Yet here she was, alive, against all odds, sheltered by people who had every reason to turn her away. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she had found more humanity among those her own people called savages than from the soldiers who claimed to represent civilization. As she closed the Bible, a piece of paper slipped from between its pages, the deed to their land claim, signed and official, representing everything Joseph had hoped to provide. Hannah stared at it, suddenly understanding that this document was more than a promise of property. It was evidence. If Hannah survived to reach a settlement, if she could get this deed to someone with authority beyond Harper's reach, it would prove she'd been part of the wagon train. It would raise questions about how she alone had survived, questions Harper would struggle to answer. It was a fragile hope, but it was something. Hannah carefully folded the deed and placed it back in the Bible. Her child deserved justice for its father's murder. The families who had died deserved to have the truth told. But first, she had to survive. The journey deeper into Lakota territory, the birth of her child, and eventually the return to her own people, where she would face suspicion and disbelief. She placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling the strong kicks of the life within. "We'll make it," she whispered, a promise to her unborn child and to Joseph's memory. "And we'll make it right." Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of those who had passed through these lands before. Settlers seeking new beginnings, soldiers carrying destruction, a Lakota scout who had chosen mercy over indifference. By morning, all Signs of their presence would be erased, leaving only the stories they would tell about each other, true or false, that would shape the world Hannah's child would inherit. The morning of departure arrived with a bitter wind that cut through the camp like an invisible blade. Hannah sat wrapped in furs inside Rising Bear's teepee, watching as the elderly medicine woman methodically packed her healing supplies. Outside, the sounds of the camp dismantling itself, hide coverings being taken down, travois being loaded, children being called to order, created a percussion of urgency that made Hannah's heart race. In 2 hours, the winter camp had transformed from a settlement to a caravan ready for travel. Snowflower entered, her breath visible in the cold air, carrying Hannah's own traveling clothes, deerskin leggings, a loose dress to accommodate her belly, and moccasins lined with rabbit fur. "These warmer than your boots," she explained, helping Hannah dress with efficient movements. "Quieter too, no creak to betray us." Hannah nodded, grateful for the practical kindness. Her own clothes, still stained with blood and torn from the attack, had been burned the night before in a small ceremony. Rising Bear had explained through Snowflower's translation that the burning would release the bad spirits attached to the massacre. Hannah wasn't sure she believed in such things, but watching the fabric turn to ash had provided an unexpected sense of closure. "Thomas says you ride with him," Snowflower continued, securing a warm sash around Hannah's middle. "His horse is strong. You will be safe." "The others," Hannah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "They're not happy about that." Snowflower's hands paused momentarily. "Some fear you bring soldiers. Others say woman with child is sacred, no matter what color her skin." She shrugged. "Thomas saved you. His responsibility. No one questions his right." But Hannah had seen the glances, heard the mutterings when she was helped outside to relieve herself. Not everyone in the camp shared Thomas and Rising Bear's capacity for compassion toward a white woman. Some faces held open hostility, others simple fear. She couldn't blame them. Her presence endangered them all. Rising Bear approached, carrying a small pouch, which she pressed into Hannah's hands, speaking rapidly in Lakota. "Grandmother says these herbs for pain, when journey is hard," Snowflower translated. "Make tea when we stop. Help baby stay quiet inside until proper time." Hannah clutched the pouch, touched by the old woman's concern. "Thank her for me. For everything." After Snowflower relayed the message, Rising Bear simply nodded, her weathered hand briefly touching Hannah's cheek in a gesture so maternal it brought unexpected tears to Hannah's eyes. Her own mother was 1,000 miles away, probably still mourning the daughter who had defied her family to marry a man without prospects. What would Eleanor Bell think if she could see her daughter now, preparing to travel deeper into Lakota territory, dependent on the mercy of those she'd been taught to fear? Thomas arrived as the women finished preparing, his face painted with red and black streaks that transformed his features into something both ceremonial and fierce. He carried extra furs and a rifle. "The scouts report soldiers 10 miles east," he said without preamble. "We travel northwest, using the creek beds where horse tracks won't show. You will ride with me. Can you sit astride?" Hannah nodded, though she wasn't entirely certain. 7 months pregnant, her balance was compromised, her body ungainly, but necessity had a way of making the impossible manageable. "Joseph taught me to ride when we were first married," she said, not adding that those lessons had taken place on a gentle mare in Pennsylvania pastures, not on a war horse fleeing soldiers through mountain terrain. Thomas seemed to read her thoughts. "My horse knows his path. Trust him as you trust me." It was perhaps the most direct acknowledgement he had made of the unusual bond forming between them. Not friendship exactly, but something beyond mere obligation. Hannah recognized the weight of his words. "I do," she said simply. Outside, the camp had nearly vanished. tipis bundled onto travois, fires extinguished and covered with snow to hide all evidence of their presence. Children were secured on horses or travois, the elderly similarly situated. Warriors and young. Men flanked the group as scouts, while women managed the loaded travois and smaller children. The efficiency of their movement spoke of long practice, of a people accustomed to mobility as a means of survival. Chief Running Elk sat mounted at the head of the caravan, his face impassive beneath the eagle feather in his hair. His eyes tracked to Hannah as Thomas helped her toward his horse, and something unreadable passed across the old chief's features. Not quite hostility, but a wariness that made Hannah straighten her spine despite her discomfort. "He lost 2 grandsons to Bluecoat rifles last summer," Thomas said quietly as he helped her mount. "He has reason to distrust any white face." "Yet he allowed me to stay," Hannah observed, settling awkwardly across the horse's back, her swollen belly making a traditional riding position impossible. She sat sideways, clinging to the horse's mane. Thomas mounted behind her in one fluid movement, his arm securing her position against his chest. "Running Elk respects the spirits. If they placed you in my path, he will not interfere with their purpose." He paused, then added, "But that respect has limits, especially where the safety of our people is concerned." The caravan moved out in near silence, each travois and horse following a careful path that would leave minimal traces. Hannah marveled at how a group this size could move so quietly, no shouting, no clanking equipment. Even the children hushed, with gentle reminders. It was so different from the wagon train, with its constant noise, its careless impact on the landscape it passed through. They traveled through the morning, following creek beds where possible, moving beneath tree cover. When available, the cold was intense, but wrapped in furs and protected by Thomas's body behind her, Hannah remained relatively comfortable. The baby shifted occasionally but seemed soothed by the rhythmic movement of the horse. Around midday as they crossed, a ridge offering a view of the plains they were leaving behind, Hannah gasped softly. In the far distance, a line of mounted men in blue coats moved like insects across the snow, following the path toward where the camp had been. "Harper's men," Thomas confirmed, his voice grim. "They would have found us by nightfall." Hannah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "He's determined. He cannot afford to let you live," Thomas replied. "A white woman who knows the truth, who could testify that it was soldiers who attacked settlers. Too dangerous." They watched for another moment as the soldiers continued their advance toward the now empty camp. Then Thomas guided the horse down the far side of the ridge, following the main caravan as it disappeared into a dense stand of pine trees. By late afternoon, Hannah's strength was flagging. The constant motion, despite Thomas's efforts to keep her secure, had awakened the pain in her injured side. Each breath became a careful negotiation with her body. Thomas noticed her increased tension and the way her hand clutched at her side. "We stop soon," he promised. "Rising Bear has prepared for your comfort." Hannah wanted to protest that she could continue, that she wouldn't be the cause of delay, but the words wouldn't come. The terrain had grown steeper, the winter sun already slipping toward the horizon. When Thomas finally called for them to halt in a sheltered valley protected by steep rock walls on 3 sides, relief flooded through her. The Lakota camp reconstituted itself with the same efficiency with which it had dismantled. Within an hour, teepees had been erected, fires carefully lit and screened to minimize visible smoke, food preparations begun. Thomas helped Hannah down from the horse, his hands strong and steady as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. "I've had enough of being weak," she murmured, frustrated by her body's limitations. Thomas's expression softened slightly. "There is no weakness in surviving, Hannah Miller, only courage." He led her to Rising Bear's tipi, already erected and warmed by a small fire. The medicine woman clucked with concern when she saw Hannah's pallor, directing her to lie down while examining her side. The wound had bled slightly during the journey, staining the bandages. As Rising Bear cleaned and redressed the injury, applying fresh poultice that smelled of pine and something sharper, Hannah found herself studying Thomas. He stood near the tippy entrance, speaking in low tones with a younger warrior who had just arrived, presumably with scouting information. In his ceremonial paint and with his rifle in hand, he looked every inch the savage from the penny dreadfuls that had circulated back east. Yet there was nothing savage about the gentle way he had secured her on his horse, or the careful manner in which he'd helped her dismount when her strength failed. Nothing savage about the community that had organized itself to protect its most vulnerable members during a dangerous journey. The true savagery had been in the calculated attack on unsuspecting families, in the policy that valued land over human lives, in the willingness to create orphans and widows to serve political aims. Hannah thought of Colonel Harper with his military authority and government sanction, and felt a clarity that cut through her exhaustion. The real danger to civilization didn't lie within this Lakota camp. Snowflower entered the teepee, carrying a wooden bowl of stew, a rich mixture of dried meat, wild onions, and some kind of ground roots that smelled surprisingly appetizing. Hannah accepted it gratefully, suddenly aware of her hunger. "Thomas says we stay 2 days," Snowflower informed her, settling beside the fire. "Let people rest before crossing mountains." Hannah nodded, relieved. "Where do we go after that?" "Sacred Spring in High Valley. Good place for winter, difficult path for bluecoats to follow, many spirits protect." The notion of spirits protecting anything would have seemed absurd to Hannah a week earlier. Now, having survived when logic said she should have perished, she was less certain. Something had guided Thomas to her side as she lay dying in the snow. Something had given her the strength to endure the journey thus far. "Snowflower," she asked hesitantly, "why do you help me? You speak English? You could be a translator with the trading posts. Instead, you're hiding in the mountains with your people, and a white woman who brings danger." The younger woman was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight beyond her years. "I was 13 when bluecoats came to my first village. They said, 'Come to fort, get food, blankets.' My father refused. That night, soldiers came, killed many, took others." Her expression remained composed, but her hands tightened on her skirt. "I was taken to mission school. 3 years they tried to make me forget my people, my language, beat children who spoke Lakota, cut our hair, said savage must become civilized." Hannah felt sick. "I'm sorry." Snowflower shrugged. "I escaped, found Thomas, who brought me back to our people. Rising Bear taught me healing ways." Her eyes met Hannah's directly. "I help you because you are not the soldiers. You are not the missionaries. You are just woman with child who needs help. My people do not turn away such need, even when face is white." The simple dignity of her explanation left Hannah speechless. She had been judged not by her race, but by her humanity. Her need weighed more heavily than her origin. It was a standard of compassion that shamed much of what she had been taught to consider Christian charity. The next 2 days passed in a fog of pain and healing for Hannah. Rising Bear's medicines slowly restored her strength, while the camp settled into its temporary rhythm around her. Children played in the snow under watchful eyes. Women prepared food and tended to clothing repairs. Men hunted what scarce game could be found and kept constant watch for pursuers. Thomas visited each evening, briefing her on the soldiers' movements. Harper's men had found the abandoned camp and were attempting to track the caravan, but heavy snowfall had obscured most signs of their passage. "They will not give up easily," he warned on the second night. Harper has sent to Fort Bridger for more men. They speak of Sioux raids and a white woman captive. The story spreads to settlements. Hannah understood the implication. If she ever returned to white society, she would be seen not as a massacre survivor, but as a woman defiled by savages, either an object of pity or suspicion. The thought brought a wave of anger that surprised her with its intensity. "They murdered my husband," she said, her voice tight. "They murdered all those families, and now they get to write the story." Thomas regarded her steadily. "History belongs to those who survive to tell it," he said. "That is why Harper fears you. You carry a different story." Hannah placed a hand on her belly, feeling the strong movements of the child within. "This baby is Joseph's legacy. Our child will know the truth, even if no one else believes it." Something like approval flickered in Thomas's eyes. "Tomorrow, we cross the high passes," he said, changing the subject. "It will be a hard journey, but safer on the other side. Can you endure it?" Hannah thought of Joseph's face the day they joined the wagon train, how his eyes had shone with hope for their future. She thought of the families who had welcomed them despite their late arrival, sharing food and stories around campfires. All of them gone now, their dreams as shattered as the wagons they'd traveled in. "I can endure anything," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The mountain crossing began before dawn, the camp once again transforming into a moving caravan with practiced efficiency. The path narrowed as they ascended, forcing them to travel single file along treacherous slopes where one misstep could mean disaster. Anna rode with Thomas as before, but the terrain required her to cling more tightly to him, their bodies pressed together for balance and warmth. The wind grew fiercer as they climbed, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin like tiny needles. Hannah buried her face against Thomas's back, grateful for his solid presence as the horse picked its way carefully among rocks and ice patches. Around mid-morning, as they navigated a particularly narrow stretch with a sheer drop to their right, a sound reached them that made Thomas tense. "Riders," he said, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Coming fast." Hannah twisted to look. Behind them, in the distance, where the path widened as it curved around the mountain, a group of mounted men had appeared. Even from this distance, the blue of their coats was unmistakable. "How?" she gasped. "You said they couldn't track us. Through the snow?" "Betrayal," Thomas replied grimly. "Someone from settlement must have known this path, guessed our direction." The Lakota caravan had already begun to react, warriors dropping back to defensive positions while women and children moved forward more quickly. Thomas shouted orders in Lakota, his voice carrying despite the wind. Then he urged his horse to greater speed, one arm locked around Hannah to secure her as they moved. "If they catch us in the pass, we are trapped," he explained tensely. "Must reach the valley before they close distance." The next hour was a blur of fear and desperate movement. The path grew steeper, then began to descend, winding through a narrow gap between towering rock faces. Hannah could hear gunshots now, echoing strangely in the mountain pass. Behind them, the soldiers had encountered the Lakota warriors, who had stayed behind to slow their advance. Thomas's face was set in hard lines, his eyes constantly scanning ahead for danger. "Almost there," he said, as they rounded a bend and the path widened slightly. "Valley just ahead." But as they emerged from the gap, a cry went up from the scouts ahead. Hannah looked past Thomas's shoulder to see 3 mounted soldiers directly in their path, rifles raised. "Ambush!" Thomas hissed, immediately yanking his horse aside into the cover of large boulders at the path's edge. They split their forces, circled ahead. Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. They were caught between 2 groups of soldiers with steep mountainsides offering little cover. Thomas dismounted in one fluid movement, then helped Hannah down, positioning her behind the largest boulder. "Stay here," he ordered, checking his rifle with quick, practiced movements. "I must help the others." "Thomas, wait." Hannah reached for his arm, suddenly terrified of being left alone. "What if they find me?" He paused, then removed a knife from his belt and pressed it into her hand. "You use this if needed, but they will not find you. I will return." Before she could protest further, he had slipped away, moving with a silence that seemed impossible for a man his size. Hannah pressed herself against the cold stone, the knife clutched in her trembling hand, and waited. The sounds of battle grew closer, gunshots, shouts in English and Lakota, the scream of a wounded horse. Hannah curled more tightly around her belly, as if she could shield her child from the violence erupting around them. She thought of Joseph, of the peaceful home they had planned to build, and felt a wave of bitter grief. How had her life led to this moment, crouched on a frozen mountainside, caught in a war she had never chosen? A noise to her left made her tense. Someone was approaching her hiding place, boots crunching on snow and gravel. Hannah raised the knife, her breath shallow with fear. A figure appeared around the edge of the boulder, a soldier, young and red-faced from cold and exertion, his rifle held ready. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Ma'am?" He lowered his weapon slightly. "Are you the captive, Mrs. Miller?" The absurdity of the question almost made Hannah laugh. Captive? She had been saved, sheltered, healed by the Lakota. The real danger stood before her in a blue uniform. "Help me," she said instead, forcing her voice to sound frightened and weak. "Please." The soldier stepped closer, relief evident on his face. "Thank God, Colonel Harper's been searching everywhere for you. Said those savages took you when they massacred your wagon train." He reached for her arm, clearly intending to help her up. Hannah let him grasp her wrist, then drove Thomas's knife deep into his thigh. The soldier screamed more in shock than pain, stumbling backward. Hannah scrambled to her feet, the knife still in her hand, now slick with blood. "It was Harper's men who attacked our wagons," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I saw them. They killed my husband. They killed everyone." Confusion and pain warred on the young soldier's face. "That's not... We were told Sioux..." "You were told lies," Hannah cut him off. "Now move aside." He reached for his rifle, which had fallen when she stabbed him. Hannah raised the knife again, knowing she wouldn't hesitate to use it if necessary. This man might be as much a victim of Harper's lies as she had been, but her child's life depended on her actions now. Before either could move, an arrow whistled through the air, striking the ground inches from the soldier's reaching hand. He froze, then slowly raised his eyes to where Thomas stood on a rock above them, another arrow already nocked. She said, "Move aside," Thomas stated flatly. The soldier raised his hands slowly, his face pale beneath his wind-burned cheeks. "She's pregnant," he said, as if this fact had just registered. "Harper said Sioux took a woman, but he never said..." "Because he lied," Hannah interrupted. "Colonel Harper ordered the attack on our wagon train. I'm the only witness left alive." Understanding dawned in the young man's eyes, followed by something that looked like disgust. "Jesus," he whispered. Then to Thomas, "There are 15 men in our party. More coming. You can't outrun them all." Thomas's expression didn't change. "We're not running anymore." He gestured with his chin toward the valley beyond. "Look." Hannah and the soldier both turned to see the valley spread below them and the forces gathered there. At least 30 Lakota warriors had taken defensive positions among the rocks, while behind them, the rest of the caravan continued toward the far end of the valley where a dense forest offered protection. "Your men rode into trap," Thomas explained, calmly. "The advance party is already captured. The ones behind will find path blocked by rockslide." The soldier's shoulders slumped. "Harper will send more men when we don't return." "Perhaps," Thomas acknowledged, "but mountain winter comes now. No passage until spring thaw. By then we will be elsewhere." He jumped down from his position, landing lightly beside Hannah. His eyes took in the bloody knife in her hand, the wounded soldier, the determined set of her jaw. Something like pride flickered across his features. "You were not helpless after all," he observed. Hannah looked down at the knife, then back, at the young soldier who was pressing his hand against his bleeding thigh. "I didn't want to hurt him," she said quietly, "but I won't let anyone take me back to Harper. I won't let my child be born into that man's lies." Thomas nodded, then addressed the soldier. "You have choice. Join your captured friends and wait for exchange when weather permits, or try mountain path alone with wounded leg." The young man grimaced. "Some choice." "More than your colonel gave the families he murdered," Hannah said, her voice harder than she'd intended. The soldier studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll go with you," he said to Thomas. "But I want to hear her full story. I want to know what really happened." Thomas helped the soldier to his feet, improvising a bandage for his wounded leg from strips of leather. As they prepared to descend into the valley, Hannah felt the baby shift within her, a strong movement that reminded her of everything at stake. She had changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. The woman who had stepped off that wagon, full of dreams about a homestead and a peaceful future, seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood someone harder, someone who had learned that survival sometimes required violence, and that humanity could be found in unexpected places. As they made their way down to join the others, Hannah caught sight of Rising Bear, waiting with Snowflower near the edge of the forest. The old medicine woman raised a hand in greeting or perhaps blessing. Behind her, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time that day, illuminating the valley in a wash of pale gold light. Despite everything, the danger still looming, the grief still raw, the uncertain future ahead, Hannah felt a moment of inexplicable peace settle over her. They had survived the crossing. They had outsmarted Harper for now, and she had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. The child moved again beneath her heart, a reminder that life continued despite loss, that new beginnings could emerge from endings. Hannah placed her hand over her belly and whispered a promise that only she and her unborn child could hear. "We will survive this, and we will never forget the truth." The sacred springs steamed in the bitter cold, sending ghostly tendrils of vapor into the air that crystallized and fell like silent snow. Hannah sat at the edge of one of the smaller pools, her swollen feet submerged in the warm mineral water, while Rising Bear massaged a mixture of herbs and tallow into her aching back. 2 weeks had passed since their narrow escape in the mountain pass. They had reached the hidden valley that Thomas had promised, a place sheltered by towering pines and fed by the network of hot springs that kept the ground from freezing even as winter tightened its grip on the mountains. The Lakota winter camp had been established with the same efficiency Hannah had come to admire. Teepees arranged in a protective circle, the springs incorporated for both practical and spiritual purposes. Here, sheltered from both the elements, and pursuing soldiers, the tribe had settled into the rhythms of winter survival. Men hunted the sparse game, women prepared hides and dried meat, children continued their education through stories and practical skills taught by elders. And Hannah Miller, once a stranger, found herself woven into the fabric of it all with increasing seamlessness. "The waters speak to your child," Rising Bear commented, her English halting but improved through daily practice with Hannah. The old woman placed a gnarled hand on Hannah's belly, nodding with satisfaction as the baby shifted beneath her touch. "Strong spirit, like father." Hannah smiled, having learned that Rising Bear referred not to Joseph but to Thomas when she spoke of the child's father. A spiritual connection rather than a blood one, formed when Thomas had saved them both from certain death. "The baby is active today," Hannah agreed, wincing as a particularly forceful kick landed just beneath her ribs. At nearly 8 months, her pregnancy had begun to wear heavily on her frame. especially given the hardships of their journey. But Rising Bear's treatments, the mineral baths, the herbal teas, the gentle massages, had worked wonders on her discomfort. "Soon!" Rising Bear nodded, patting Hannah's belly once more before helping her to her feet. When Moon is full again, new life comes. The thought both thrilled and terrified Hannah. How would she deliver a child here, so far from everything familiar? Yet she had come to trust Rising Bear's medical knowledge, which combined practical experience with spiritual. Rituals that, while foreign to Hannah's Protestant upbringing, carried a comfort all their own. They walked slowly back toward the camp, Hannah's bare feet slipping into the moccasins that Snowflower had made for her, softer and more comfortable than any shoes she'd worn before, decorated with beadwork in patterns that Snowflower explained, represented protection and safe passage. Every day brought new lessons in Lakota ways, from practical skills to deeper understandings of their spiritual connection to the land. As they approached the circle of teepees, Hannah noticed increased activity near the central fire pit. The captured soldiers from Harper's ambush party, 7 men in total, including the young soldier she had stabbed, whose name she had learned was David Cooper, were being brought forward under guard. Thomas stood with Chief Running Elk and several elder warriors, his face solemn as he addressed the prisoners. Hannah quickened her pace, curious despite Rising Bear's cautioning hand on her arm. She had seen little of the captured men since their arrival, as they had been kept under guard in a separate shelter at the edge of the camp. Food and medical attention had been provided, but interaction had been strictly limited. "What's happening?" she asked Snowflower, who approached from the direction of the gathering. "Council decides fate of bluecoats," Snowflower explained, her expression troubled. "Some warriors want blood payment for our people killed in mountain. A pass." Hannah felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. 3 Lakota warriors had died defending the caravan during the ambush, and several others had been wounded. She knew enough about tribal justice to understand that a balance would be sought. Lives for lives. And Running Elk, what does he want? Snowflower shrugged. "Chief listens. All voices must be heard before he speaks." She glanced at Hannah with a meaningful look. Perhaps white woman who speaks truth should also be heard. Hannah hesitated. She had no standing in the tribe, no right to interfere in their decisions, yet she felt a responsibility for these men's fate, particularly young Cooper, who had listened to her story during their journey to the valley and had seemed genuinely disturbed by the truth about Harper's actions. "Will they listen to me?" she asked dubiously. Rising Bear, who had followed their conversation with her limited English, snorted softly. "They listen, not same as obey." But she nodded encouragingly all the same. Hannah squared her shoulders and moved toward the gathering, conscious of the eyes that turned to follow her progress. The captured soldiers watched her approach, with expressions ranging from hope to suspicion. Cooper, his leg still bandaged but healing well under Rising Bear's care, offered a tentative nod of recognition. Thomas saw her coming and stepped forward. To intercept her, his voice low. "This is not your concern, Hannah Miller." "It is," she countered firmly. "Those men were deceived by Harper, just as I was, just as everyone has been." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "They pointed guns at our people. 3 warriors died. And that deserves justice," Hannah agreed. "But killing these men won't stop Harper. It will only fuel his lies about savage attacks." A muscle worked in Thomas's jaw as he considered her words. Finally, he nodded tersely. "You may speak. Running Elk will decide if he hears." He led her to the circle of leaders, where Chief Running Elk sat with the tribal elders. The old chief's face remained impassive as Thomas explained Hannah's request in Lakota. After a long pause, Running Elk gestured for her to approach. Hannah felt suddenly conscious of her appearance. Her swollen belly prominent beneath the deerskin dress she now wore, her fair hair braided in Lakota style by Snowflower that morning, her feet in beaded moccasins. She was neither fully of her old world nor truly part of this new one, yet perhaps that unique position allowed her to bridge the gap between them. "I know these men trespassed on your lands," she began, speaking slowly to allow Thomas to translate for those who understood no English. "I know they came with weapons and with orders that cost Lakota lives. I am not asking you to forgive that." Running Elk watched her with ancient, weathered eyes that had seen too many broken promises to trust easily. Hannah met his gaze directly, determined to speak truth as plainly as she could. "But these soldiers were told lies by Colonel Harper, the same man who ordered the attack on my wagon train, who murdered my husband and would have left me to die in the snow. The same man who breaks treaties and blames the Lakota for his own crimes," Thomas translated, his voice carrying her words to all gathered. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably, especially those who had initially resisted Cooper's growing accounts of Harper's deception. "If you kill these men, Harper will use their deaths to demand even more soldiers, more weapons. He will tell more lies about Lakota savagery, and more innocent people, both white and Lakota, will die." Hannah placed a hand on her belly, feeling the child move beneath her palm. "I want my child to see peace between our peoples, not endless bloodshed built on lies." Running Elk spoke for the first time, asking a question that Thomas translated. "What justice would you have us give, woman who carries truth?" Hannah considered her answer carefully. "Keep them until spring. When the pass is clear, send them back with the true story of what Harper has done. Let them take my testimony, written and signed, so that others may know what really happened at Eagle Pass." A murmur ran through the gathered Lakota as Thomas translated. Some voices rose in obvious protest, warriors gesturing angrily toward the prisoners. Running Elk raised a hand for silence, then addressed Hannah again through Thomas. "Why would these men speak truth when they return? Bluecoat loyalty is to Bluecoats." It was a fair question. Hannah turned to look at the soldiers, particularly at Cooper, whose young face showed the conflicted emotions of a man whose certainties had been shattered. "Lieutenant Cooper," she called, "if you were allowed to return to Fort Bridger in spring, would you tell the truth about Colonel Harper's actions? About what really happened to my wagon train? About how the Lakota spared your lives when they could have taken them?" Cooper struggled to his feet, wincing slightly as he put weight on his injured leg. "Mrs. Miller, I joined the army to protect settlers, not to murder them." His voice carried the accent of his Boston upbringing, educated and earnest. "What Harper did, what he made us complicit in, goes against everything I thought we stood for." He glanced at his fellow soldiers, some of whom nodded reluctantly. "I can't speak for all my men, but I give you my word. I will report the truth to Harper's superiors, whatever it costs me." Hannah turned back to Running Elk. "There are good men among the Bluecoats, just as there are good men among the Lakota. If we give them the chance to prove it, perhaps something can change." Running Elk was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving from Hannah to the soldiers, to the faces of his own people. Finally, he spoke at length in Lakota, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. Thomas listened intently, then provided translation for Hannah and the soldiers. "Chief Running Elk says this: the captives will live. They will stay until spring thaw makes mountain crossing possible. They will help with camp duties like all men. Hunting, wood gathering, shelter repair. They will learn Lakota ways so they understand the people they were sent to destroy." Thomas paused, meeting Cooper's eyes directly. "And when they return to their world, they will carry truth with them. If they betray this trust, Lakota warriors will find them, no matter where they hide." Relief washed over Hannah, visible also on Cooper's face. The other soldiers showed a mixture of reactions, from gratitude to lingering resentment, but all nodded their acceptance of the terms. Running Elk raised his hand in dismissal, and the gathering began to disperse, warriors returning the prisoners. to their shelter with marginally less hostility than before. Thomas remained at Hannah's side as she thanked Running Elk with the formal gestures Snowflower had taught her. The old chief nodded once in acknowledgement, then departed with his closer advisors, leaving Hannah and Thomas alone by the central fire. "You took a risk," Thomas observed, stoking the flames with a long stick. "Many warriors wanted blood payment." "It was the right thing to do," Hannah said simply. "More death won't bring back those we've lost. Not your warriors, not my husband, not the families from my wagon train." Thomas studied her face in the firelight. "You have changed since I found you in the snow." The observation startled her, though she knew it to be true. The Hannah Miller, who had boarded that wagon in Independence, would hardly recognize the woman she had become, a woman who could stab a soldier without hesitation to protect her child, who could speak before a tribal council with confidence, who had learned to see beyond the narrow confines of her upbringing. "Everything has changed," she replied softly. "Nothing is as I thought it would be." Thomas's expression softened slightly, the stern lines of his face relaxing. "Is that only sorrow speaking?" Hannah considered the question honestly. She had lost Joseph, lost the future they had planned together, lost the simplicity of a world, divided neatly into civilized and savage. Yet in that loss, she had gained something too, a deeper understanding of humanity in all its complexity, a strength she hadn't known she possessed, and connections to people who had shown her more kindness than many from her own culture ever had. "No," she said finally, "not only sorrow." Thomas nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "The child comes soon. Rising Bear prepares special teepee for birthing, sacred place by smaller spring." The mention of the impending birth brought Hannah's anxiety rushing back. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the confession easier in the gathering darkness. "What if something goes wrong? What if I can't?" "Rising Bear has delivered more children than winters I have lived," Thomas interrupted gently. "And you are stronger than you know." His confidence should have been reassuring, but Hannah felt tears threatening nonetheless. Tears born of accumulated grief, fear, and the hormonal surges of late pregnancy. "Joseph should be here," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "He should see his child born." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, with uncharacteristic openness, he said, "When my wife died carrying our child, I thought spirits had abandoned me. I walked alone for many moons, carrying anger like burning coal in my hands." His voice had softened, revealing a vulnerability she had never heard from him before. "Then one day, I found myself in snow, standing over a white woman who should have been enemy, but spirits whispered, 'Here is life you can save.'" Hannah looked up at him, startled by both the personal revelation and its implication. "You think it was meant to be, that Joseph died so you could find me?" Thomas shook his head. "No, death is never payment for new path. But spirits weave threads we cannot see. Joseph's thread continues through child you carry. My wife's thread continues through life I gave you." He gestured toward the camp around them, the teepees glowing from within with firelight, the families preparing evening meals, the children being called in from play, all threads connected, all part of larger pattern. It wasn't a Christian explanation of God's plan or divine purpose. Yet Hannah found unexpected comfort in the Lakota perspective Thomas offered. The idea that Joseph's life continued through their child, that his thread remained woven into a larger design, resonated with her own need to believe that his death held meaning. "Thank you," she said simply. Thomas nodded once, then stood. "Rest now. Tomorrow Cooper and his men begin work, much to teach them before spring comes." As he walked away, Hannah remained by the fire, watching the sparks rise towards stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. For the first time since the massacre, she felt a fragile sense of hope taking root alongside her grief. Hope that truth might prevail, that healing might be possible, that the child within her might be born into something better than the hate and lies that had claimed its father. The days that followed brought an awkward new dynamic to the winter camp as Cooper and his men began to integrate into its daily routines. Under close supervision, the soldiers were assigned tasks essential to the community's survival: chopping firewood, helping repair teepees damaged in the journey, eventually joining hunting parties once their trustworthiness had been provisionally established. Hannah watched with interest as Cooper in particular threw himself into these duties with genuine engagement, asking questions about Lakota techniques and traditions, learning phrases in the language, and treating the elders with respect. Some of his men followed his example more reluctantly, while others maintained a sullen resistance, performing tasks with minimal effort and avoiding interaction when possible. "Lieutenant seems determined to understand our ways," Snowflower observed. One afternoon, as they worked together preparing hides for winter clothing, Cooper could be seen nearby, learning from an elder warrior how to fashion snowshoes from bent wood and sinew. "Not like others." Hannah nodded, pausing to rest her aching back. Her pregnancy had reached its final stages, her body heavy and ungainly, her movements increasingly limited. Cooper's family in Boston were abolitionists, she explained. He joined the army, believing he would protect innocent people. Learning about Harper's actions shook everything he thought he knew. Snowflower looked thoughtful as she scraped a deer hide with practiced movements. "Hard thing when path you walk turns under your feet." "Yes," Hannah agreed, thinking of her own journey from Philadelphia society daughter to frontier widow to whatever she was becoming here among the Lakota. "But sometimes the new path leads somewhere better." Snowflower smiled, the expression warming her reserved features. "You speak like Lakota woman now." The observation pleased Hannah more than she expected. Though she knew she would never truly be Lakota, her pale skin and blue eyes marked her irrevocably as other. She had come to deeply respect the culture that had saved her life and sheltered her child. Learning their ways felt less like necessity now and more like honor. Their conversation was interrupted by Rising Bear's arrival, the medicine woman gesturing for Hannah to follow her with an urgency that triggered immediate concern. "What's wrong?" Hannah asked, struggling to her feet with Snowflower's assistance. Rising Bear pointed toward the edge of camp, where a small group had gathered. "Rider comes. Scout from North Camps. News of bluecoats." Thomas met them as they approached, his expression grave. A young warrior sat wrapped in furs near the fire, exhaustion evident in his face as he accepted warm broth from one of the women. He had clearly ridden hard through difficult conditions to reach them. "What news?" Hannah asked Thomas quietly. "Harper moves," Thomas replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "He has brought more soldiers from Eastern Fort, nearly 100 men. They prepare for major operation when spring comes." Hannah felt cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. "He's going to attack the Lakota camps." Thomas nodded grimly. "Not just ours. All camps in region. Scout says Harper speaks of final solution to Indian problem. No more treaties, no more reservations, just removal." The genocidal implications made Hannah's blood run cold. "But why now?" "The treaties..." "Gold," Thomas interrupted flatly. "Found in Black Hills. Territory promised to Lakota in last treaty, now valuable to white government. Harper simply provides excuse to break promise." His jaw tightened. Same story, different season. Hannah looked around at the winter camp, at the children playing, the elders teaching, the community that had taken her in when she had nothing. The thought of Harper's forces descending on them with superior numbers and weapons was unbearable. "We have to warn them," she said urgently. "All the camps. They need time to prepare, to decide whether to fight or flee." already happening, Thomas assured her. Runners leave tonight for other camps, but spring is still distant. Snow protects us for now. Hannah wasn't comforted. She had seen the determination in Harper's eyes when he inspected the wagon train before they departed Independence, had heard his contemptuous remarks about making room for civilization in the territories. A man like that wouldn't be deterred by winter conditions forever. What about Cooper and his men? She asked. Do they know? Thomas's expression hardened. Not yet. First, we must decide if they can be trusted with such knowledge. Cooper would. Help us, Hannah insisted. He gave his word to speak the truth about Harper. Words come easily in captivity, Thomas reminded her. True nature shows only in free choice. He had a point, Hannah had to admit. Despite Cooper's apparent sincerity, his ultimate loyalty might still lie with the military that had shaped him. Yet something instinctive told her that the young lieutenant's moral compass would not allow him to participate in the kind of atrocity Harper was planning. At least talk to him, she urged. Sound him out about Harper's character, about what he might be capable of. You don't have to reveal what we know. Thomas considered this, then nodded reluctantly. I will speak with him, but watch carefully for reaction. He glanced at the scout, who was now conferring with Running Elk and the other elders. Council meets tonight. Big decisions must be made. As Thomas moved to join the gathering elders, Hannah felt the baby shift restlessly within, her as if responding to her own anxiety. She placed a soothing hand on her belly, murmuring reassurances she didn't fully believe. It will be all right, little one, she whispered. We'll find a way through this. Snowflower appeared at her side, concern evident in her dark eyes. Bad news comes, she observed. I see in your face. Hannah nodded, not seeing any reason to hide the truth from someone who had become as close as a sister in these past weeks. Harper gathers soldiers for spring campaign, many soldiers. Snowflower's expression tightened, but she showed no surprise. Old story, she said simply. Lakota know this dance well. Promise land, find value in land. Take land, kill those who resist. She touched the medicine pouch at her waist, a gesture Hannah had noticed she made when seeking spiritual strength. But this time, we have weapon Harper does not expect. What weapon? Hannah asked, puzzled. Snowflower looked at her directly. Truth speaker with white skin and blue eyes, woman who carries proof of Harper's crimes. Her hand moved to rest briefly on Hannah's belly. And child born between two worlds who will carry story forward when we are gone. The weight of responsibility in Snowflower's words nearly buckled Hannah's knees. Could her testimony really make a difference against the machinery of institutional power that Harper represented? Would anyone believe a woman who had lived among the savages, who would be seen as corrupted or coerced by her time with the Lakota? Yet what choice did she have but to try? For Joseph's memory, for the child she carried, for the people who had saved her when her own kind had left her to die, she had to believe that truth held power, that justice could prevail even in a world that seemed determined to bend both to its own purposes. I will speak, she promised Snowflower, whatever it costs me. As darkness fell over the camp, Hannah found herself unable to rest despite Rising Bear's insistence that she conserve her strength for the coming birth. From the teepee she now shared with the medicine woman and Snowflower, she could see the council fire burning bright, silhouettes of tribal leaders deep in discussion about the fate that threatened them all. Thomas had taken Cooper aside earlier, their conversation intense, but too distant for Hannah to overhear. Both men had then joined the council, Cooper's presence a significant departure from protocol that signaled the seriousness of the situation. Whatever Thomas had said had been enough to grant the lieutenant participation in these crucial deliberations. Hannah paced as much as her advanced pregnancy would allow, pausing occasionally to press her hands against her lower back where persistent aches had intensified throughout the day. Rising Bear watched her movements with the knowing eyes of an experienced midwife. "Walking good," the old woman approved. "Helps baby find path." She gestured for Hannah to sit briefly while she pressed, her gnarled hands against Hannah's swollen belly, nodding with satisfaction at what she felt. Soon now, very soon. The prospect sent a flutter of anxiety through Hannah's chest. "Not tonight," she pleaded, "not with everything else happening." Rising Bear shrugged philosophically. "Baby comes when spirits call, not for mother to decide." As if in agreement, a sharp cramp seized Hannah's abdomen, stronger than the practice contractions she'd been experiencing for days. She gasped, steadying herself against a support pole. "Just a cramp," she insisted when she caught her breath. "Nothing more." Rising Bear's expression remained skeptical, but she didn't contradict Hannah directly. Instead, she began quietly, gathering her birthing supplies, clean cloths, special herbs, a small ceremonial drum used to echo the mother's heartbeat during labor. Her preparations did nothing to calm Hannah's growing certainty that the baby was indeed coming, and at the most inconvenient moment possible, another contraction gripped her just as Snowflower entered the teepee, her face troubled from whatever discussions were occurring at the council fire. "Hannah?" she asked, immediately noticing her friend's distress. "The baby?" "It's nothing," Hannah insisted, though the tightening of her belly beneath her hands belied her words. "What's happening at the council? What are they deciding?" Snowflower exchanged a glance with Rising Bear, clearly torn between respecting Hannah's attempts at denial and acknowledging the reality of her condition. Finally, she chose to answer the question rather than challenge the obvious. "Many voices, many paths suggested," she reported, helping Hannah to a more comfortable sitting position. "Some say fight, some say hide deeper in mountains, some say seek alliance with other tribes." She hesitated, then added, "Cooper speaks much of Harper's methods, his weaknesses. Thomas listens carefully." Another contraction seized Hannah, this one impossible to disguise. She clutched Snowflower's hand, breathing through the pain as Rising Bear had taught her. "I need to be there," she gasped when it passed. "I need to tell them about the deed, about Joseph's claim. It's evidence against Harper. You need to birth child," Rising Bear corrected firmly, now openly laying out the special furs reserved for delivery. "Council waits. Baby will not." As if to punctuate the medicine woman's words, Hannah felt a rush of warm fluid between her legs, her waters breaking with undeniable finality. Snowflower immediately began helping her out of her soaked garments, while Rising Bear muttered what sounded like ceremonial prayers in Lakota. "Thomas," Hannah managed between increasingly intense contractions. "I need to talk to Thomas before..." Her words cut off as another wave of pain crashed through her. Snowflower nodded, pressing a cool cloth to Hannah's forehead. "I will bring him. But first, we move you to birthing teepee. Sacred space ready. For new life." Between contractions, the two women helped Hannah to her feet and supported her short, difficult journey to the smaller teepee Rising Bear had prepared near the warm springs. Inside, everything had been arranged for the birth. Soft, furs layered thickly on the ground, the air fragrant with sacred herbs, a small fire providing both warmth and light. As Hannah was settled into position, Snowflower squeezed her hand once, then slipped away to find Thomas. Left alone with Rising Bear, Hannah surrendered to the ancient rhythm of labor, her body knowing what to do even as her mind raced with fears and uncertainties. "Breathe with pain," Rising Bear instructed, demonstrating a pattern of inhales and exhales. "Pain brings child closer with each wave. Hannah tried to follow the old woman's guidance, but as the contractions intensified and accelerated, it became increasingly difficult to maintain any semblance of control. She found herself crying out, first in English, then in fragments of Lakota she had absorbed during her time with the tribe. "Strong woman," Rising Bear approved, her weathered hands massaging Hannah's lower back through a particularly violent contraction. "Strong child comes." Through a haze of pain, Hannah became aware of the tippy flap opening, admitting a blast of cold air and Thomas's broad-shouldered silhouette. His expression, normally so controlled, showed clear alarm at Hannah's condition. "The baby comes now?" he asked Rising Bear, who merely nodded as she continued her ministrations. "Thomas," Hannah gasped, reaching for him between contractions. "The deed in Joseph's Bible, you must take it." Another wave of pain cut off her words, transforming them into a primal groan that seemed to rise from the very core of her being. Thomas knelt beside her, his hand engulfing hers with surprising gentleness. "What deed?" he asked when the contraction passed. "Land claim," Hannah panted. "Proves we were legal settlers. Proves Harper had no right." She broke off again as her body seized with the overwhelming urge to push. Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. "Evidence of Harper's crimes against legitimate settlers," he confirmed. "Where is this Bible?" "My things, Snowflower knows." Hannah could no longer focus on anything but the overwhelming demands of her body as it worked to bring her child into the world. Rising Bear had moved to position herself between Hannah's bent knees, her experienced hands ready to guide the baby's emergence. Thomas squeezed her hand once more, then rose to find Snowflower and the critical document. As he left, Hannah surrendered completely to the ancient process that had claimed her, letting instinct guide her through the final, most intense phase of labor. Time lost all meaning as Hannah pushed with each contraction, encouraged by Rising Bear's steady guidance. The pain was transcendent, beyond anything she had experienced before, yet somehow she found strength to move through it, drawing on reserves she hadn't known she possessed. When the baby's head finally crowned, Rising Bear called out in triumphant Lakota. Hannah gathered her remaining strength for one final monumental push, and suddenly the pressure released in a rush as her child slipped from her body into Rising Bear's waiting hands. For one breathless moment, silence filled the teepee. Then a lusty, indignant cry split the air, the unmistakable announcement of new life successfully delivered into the world. "Daughter," Rising Bear proclaimed, lifting the squalling, blood-slicked infant for Hannah to see. "Strong girl child with warrior spirit." Tears streamed down Hannah's face as Rising Bear placed the tiny, perfect being on her chest. The baby's eyes were screwed shut, her tiny fists clenched in outrage at the cold, bright world she had entered, but she was whole and alive and miraculous. "Hello, little one," Hannah whispered, counting fingers and toes with trembling hands. "Your father would have loved you so much." As Rising Bear efficiently completed the birthing process, delivering the afterbirth, tying off the umbilical cord with ceremonial string, cleaning both mother and child with warm water infused with healing herbs, Hannah marveled at the small life cradled against her heart. Despite everything, the massacre, the desperate flight, the threat still looming on the horizon, this child had found her way safely into the world. Snowflower entered the teepee with fresh blankets, her face alight with joy at the sight of the newborn. "She is beautiful," she exclaimed, helping to wrap the infant in a soft rabbit-skin blanket she had prepared for this moment. "What name will you give her?" Hannah looked down at her daughter's face, now calming as she nestled against her mother's warmth. Joseph had wanted to name a girl after his mother, Margaret. But somehow that name belonged to another life, another world. This child had been born into something different, a life bridging two cultures, carrying both tragedy and hope in her tiny being. Hope, Hannah decided, the name rising from some deep certainty within her. Her name is Hope Miller. As if recognizing her name, the infant opened her eyes for the first time, revealing irises of deep, midnight blue. Newborn eyes that would likely change, but which in that moment seemed to contain all the mystery and promise of the star-filled Dakota sky. Outside the birthing teepee, unbeknownst to Hannah, the council had reached its decision. Thomas stood with Cooper and Chief running elk, Joseph's Bible containing the precious deed clutched in his hand, physical proof that might yet turn the tide against Harper's machinations. Inside, cradling her newborn daughter, Hannah Miller felt a peace that transcended the uncertainties still facing them. Whatever came with the spring thaw, she was no longer just a survivor. She was a mother, and in that ancient primal identity, she found a strength that would carry her through whatever battles lay ahead. February brought winds that howled through, the mountain passes like vengeful spirits, driving snow into drifts taller than a man. Within the sheltered valley, the Lakota winter camp endured as it had for generations, its people adapting to nature's challenges with resilience born of ancient knowledge. Hannah sat cross-legged in Rising Bear's teepee, her daughter Hope nursing contentedly at her breast while snow pelted the hide walls around them. 6 weeks had passed since the difficult birth, and both mother and child had thrived despite the harsh conditions and uncertain future. "She grows strong," Rising Bear observed, pausing in her work, grinding dried roots into medicinal powder. "Good milk, good spirit." Hannah smiled down at her daughter, marveling yet again at the tiny, perfect being who had entered the world amid such chaos. Hope had Joseph's dark curls and something of his determined chin, but her eyes, originally the deep blue of all newborns, had begun to shift toward Hannah's lighter shade. A bridge between worlds, Thomas had called her when he first held the infant, his normally stern features softening as Hope's tiny hand curled instinctively around his finger. "She's easier when the storms come," Hannah noted, stroking the baby's cheek as she nursed. "The wind seems to soothe her." Rising Bear nodded, unsurprised. "Winter child, born to storms, they speak to her spirit." Such explanations no longer sounded strange to Hannah's ears. Her time among the Lakota had opened her to ways of understanding the world that went beyond the rigid Protestant teachings of her childhood. She found herself appreciating the spiritual connections the tribe recognized between people, animals, and the natural world, connections that provided meaning and guidance where her own traditions had sometimes offered only judgment. Snowflower entered the teepee in a swirl of cold air, quickly securing the flap behind her. She carried a bundle of newly prepared hides, the result of the most recent successful hunt. "Council again," she reported, settling beside the fire to warm her hands. "Cooper brings news from captured soldiers. Talks much with Thomas." Hannah's attention sharpened. Lieutenant Cooper had proven himself a valuable ally in the weeks since his capture, using his military knowledge to help the tribe prepare for Harper's anticipated spring offensive. The respect between him and Thomas had grown gradually, built on shared concerns despite their different backgrounds. "What news?" Hannah asked, adjusting Hope as she finished nursing and began to drift towards sleep. Snowflower's expression turned grim. "Scout from Eastern Ridge returned. Harper builds something at Mountain Pass. Many men work even in snow." "A fort?" Hannah suggested, knowing that establishing forward military positions was standard procedure for campaigns into indigenous territories. "No!" Snowflower shook her head. "Something else. Wooden towers, metal things. Cooper very worried when told." Unease prickled along Hannah's spine. "I should speak with them," she decided carefully, shifting the now sleeping Hope into the cradleboard Snowflower had crafted for her. The intricate beadwork and protective symbols decorating the traditional carrier reflected the tribe's acceptance of the child as one of their own. Rising Bear made a disapproving sound. "Storm worsens. Baby needs mother close." Hannah secured, hope in the cradleboard, then wrapped herself in the thick fur cloak that had become her standard protection against the bitter mountain cold. "I hope we'll sleep now. I won't be long." Despite Rising Bear's continued protests, Hannah stepped out into the biting wind, the snow immediately stinging her exposed cheeks and forehead. She pulled her hood lower and made her way toward the central council teepee, where smoke curled more thickly from the opening at its peak. The storm had driven most of the camp's inhabitants inside, leaving the paths between teepees eerily deserted. When Hannah pushed aside the entrance flap, warmth and the murmur of male voices greeted her. The council teepee was larger than the others, designed to accommodate the tribe's leaders and important discussions. A central fire burned brightly, around which sat Chief Running Elk, Thomas, Lieutenant Cooper, and several elder warriors. Maps, drawn on hides stretched between them, weighted with stones at the corners. Their conversation halted at her entrance, faces turning toward her with varying expressions of surprise. While Hannah had earned unusual status within the tribe due to her unique circumstances, women rarely participated directly in war councils. Thomas rose first, coming to help her remove her snow-covered cloak. "The child?" he asked, concern evident in his typically reserved features. "Sleeping," Hannah assured him. "Snowflower mentioned news from the scouts about Harper." Cooper stood as well, offering her his place near the fire with the ingrained courtesy of his Boston upbringing. Though initially reluctant, Hannah had come to appreciate that the lieutenant's formality stemmed from genuine respect rather than condescension. "Mrs. Miller," he acknowledged as she settled on the fur-covered ground. "I'm afraid the news isn't good." Chief Running Elk, who had been carefully cultivating his limited English through daily practice, gestured toward the maps. "Harper brings big guns," he stated gravely. "Not for men, for mountains." Hannah looked at the crude drawings on the hide maps, trying to understand. Cooper moved closer, pointing to markings along what she recognized as the main pass leading to their valley. "They're installing artillery positions," he explained, his voice tight with professional concern. 12-pounder Napoleon cannons, from what our scout described. Possibly even a Parrott rifle. When Hannah's expression remained confused, Thomas elaborated. "Weapons that shoot exploding metal across great distance can destroy entire village with few shots." The implication sent ice through Hannah's veins. "But why position them at the pass? If they don't know exactly where we are, they don't need to," Cooper interrupted grimly. "These weapons aren't meant for precision. They're meant to make the entire area uninhabitable." His jaw tightened. "It's a siege strategy. Harper plans to shell every habitable valley in the region once the spring thaw makes the passes navigable. For his supply wagons." "He would fire blindly?" Hannah asked, horrified, "without knowing if he's hitting warriors or women and children?" Cooper's expression darkened. "Mrs. Miller, I believe that distinction doesn't matter to Colonel Harper. This isn't a military campaign in any traditional sense. It's an extermination." The silence fell around the fire as the Lakota elders absorbed Cooper's translation of this assessment. Chief Running Elk's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes burned with a cold understanding that transcended language barriers. "On moon, snow melts," he stated. "Path clears, big guns speak." He made a sweeping gesture with his hand. "All Lakota die." Hannah looked around at the gathered faces, seeing the weight of this threat register. These people had survived for generations through deep knowledge of the land, mobility, and tactical intelligence against conventional forces. But artillery changed everything. No amount of warrior courage or strategic brilliance could stand against shells raining down from miles away. "There must be something we can do," she insisted, unwilling to accept the death sentence hanging over the community that had saved her and her child. Cooper shook his head slowly. "Napoleon cannons have an effective range of over a mile. The Parrott rifle, if that's what they have, nearly 3 miles. No conventional attack by tribal warriors could reach the gunners before they could decimate any approaching force." "And if we flee?" Thomas asked, his voice level despite the dire implications. "Find new valleys, new mountains?" "Harper has scouts monitoring all major passes," Cooper replied. "Any large movement of people would be spotted and pursued. And there's another problem." He hesitated, glancing at Hannah. "Mrs. Miller's testimony and the land deed are powerful evidence against Harper, but only if they reach proper authorities." "The spring thaw works against us twice," Hannah realized. It lets Harper bring his artillery into position, and it's our only chance to get the evidence out to someone who could stop him." Thomas nodded grimly. "Two enemies, bullets and time." Running Elk spoke at length in Lakota, his words carrying the weight of generations of wisdom. When he finished, Thomas translated for Hannah and Cooper. "Chief says Lakota have faced extinction before. Each time, spirit showed a path where eyes saw none. We must look with spirit eyes now, not just warrior eyes." Hannah found herself studying the map more intently, her mind racing with possibilities that seemed to evaporate as quickly as they formed. How could a small tribe with traditional weapons possibly counter artillery placed on defensible high ground? How could one pregnant massacre survivor's testimony outweigh the political momentum behind Harper's campaign? Her eyes fell on markings indicating a smaller, steeper pass to the east of the main approach. "What about this route?" she asked, pointing. "Could we send runners with the evidence this way?" Cooper leaned closer, examining the area she indicated. "Too narrow for Harper's artillery wagons, which is probably why he hasn't focused on it. But," he shook his head, "the grade is nearly 45 degrees in places, impassable until full thaw, and dangerous even then." "Unless," Thomas interjected slowly, "we make our own path." All eyes turned to him as he traced a finger along the smaller pass. Ancient stories tell of Lakota warriors using moon sleds on snow slopes too steep for horses, similar to devices white traders call toboggans. With enough men, supplies could be pulled up, then sleds ridden down at great speed. Cooper looked skeptical. "How would that help? Even if a few men could navigate down, Harper has patrols throughout the territory. Anyone approaching from the mountains would be spotted and intercepted long before reaching any settlement, or he fought not under Harper's influence." A new voice joined the conversation from the teepee entrance. "Unless they weren't seen as a threat." Hannah turned to see Lieutenant James Davis, Cooper's second-in-command, standing just inside the flap. Unlike Cooper, Davis had maintained a polite but definite distance from the Lakota, fulfilling assigned tasks but rarely engaging beyond necessity. His sudden contribution to the council discussion surprised everyone. "Lieutenant?" Cooper prompted. Davis stepped further into the firelight, his military bearing intact despite weeks as a captive. "Blue uniforms," he said simply. "Harper's men won't fire on what appears to be a military patrol." Cooper's eyes widened slightly as he grasped Davis's implication. "A disguise." "A small group," Davis continued, warming to his strategy. "Moving fast, wearing salvaged uniforms from our captured supplies. 2 or 3 warriors who speak enough English to pass casual inspection, accompanied by..." He hesitated, then looked directly at Hannah. "By Mrs. Miller, whose presence would deflect suspicion." Hannah's heart jumped at the suggestion. "Harper knows I survived. He'd recognize me." "Not if you were veiled as a grieving widow being escorted to the nearest proper settlement," Davis countered. And not all of Harper's men know your face. Only a patrol encountering you would report back, by which time you could reach Fort Laramie to the south. Harper has enemies there, officers who question his methods and his territorial ambitions. Thomas was already shaking his head before Davis finished. Too dangerous for mother with infant. The baby would remain here, Davis said carefully, clearly having anticipated this objection. Mrs. Miller could travel faster without her, and the child would be safer away from the journey's risks. Hannah's instinctive rejection of any plan separating her from hope must have shown clearly on her face, because Davis quickly continued. It would be temporary, Mrs. Miller. Once Harper is exposed and removed from command, you could return for your daughter or send an official escort. Chief Running Elk, who had followed the exchange through Thomas's ongoing translation, spoke a single question in Lakota. Thomas relayed it to the group. Why would Blue Coat help Lakota escape Harper's guns? Why risk your own people? Davis straightened, meeting the chief's penetrating gaze directly. Because I didn't join the army to murder innocent families, sir. Neither did Cooper nor most of our men. His voice hardened. What Harper plans isn't warfare. It's a crime, and I took an oath to the Constitution, not to any single commander's personal crusade. A long silence followed as Running Elk studied the lieutenant's face, seeming to look beyond his words to measure the integrity behind them. Finally, the old chief nodded once, then spoke again, gesturing to include both Davis and Cooper. Chief says bluecoats who stand against murder of women and children will be remembered in Lakota stories, Thomas translated. But plan needs more work, many details to consider. For the next several hours, the council debated the feasibility of Davis's suggestion, identifying weak points and possible countermeasures. Maps were redrawn with greater detail, timelines established, responsibilities assigned. Throughout, Hannah remained largely silent, her mind wrestling with the impossible choice she might face: remain safely with her child while others risked their lives carrying her testimony, or leave hope behind to bear witness herself to Harper's crimes. As the council concluded for the evening, Thomas walked with Hannah back toward Rising Bear's teepee, the storm having subsided to gentle snowfall that muffled their footsteps. "You are troubled," he observed, breaking the companionable silence that had developed between them over the months. Hannah pulled her cloak tighter against the cold. "How could I leave her, Thomas? She's barely 6 weeks old." "No one has decided you must go," he reminded her. "Many factors to consider still." "But they're right," Hannah admitted reluctantly. "My testimony carries weight that yours or Cooper's alone wouldn't. A white woman, a settler's widow with documentary proof of legal land claims that Harper knowingly violated, that's a story that might be believed." She swallowed hard against the emotion rising in her throat. "Hope might have a future only if I'm willing to leave her behind to secure it." Thomas was quiet for several steps before responding. "When I found you in snow, you fought to live. For unborn child, now child is born, and you must decide how best to protect her still." His voice softened slightly. No easy answer. But Rising Bear would guard hope with her life. All camp would. Hannah knew this was true. The tribe had embraced her daughter with extraordinary openness, seeing in her tiny form a bridge between worlds rather than a reminder of differences. Hope would be loved and protected here, perhaps even better than in the suspicious, judgmental white settlements that lay beyond the mountains. "And if I don't return?" she whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. "If Harper's men catch us on the trail, or if no one at Fort Laramie believes me?" Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her directly in the soft snowfall. His normally impassive features showed a rare vulnerability. "Then hope becomes daughter to all Lakota," he said simply, "raised in our ways, honored for her mother's courage. And when she is grown, she will know full truth of who you were and why you fought." Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks, freezing almost instantly in the cold air. She's all I have left of Joseph." "No," Thomas corrected gently. "She is not all. You carry him in memory, in stories you will tell her one day, in courage he gave you." He hesitated, then added, "When my wife died, I thought all of her was gone. But Lakota believes spirit continues, influences world in ways we cannot always. See, perhaps Joseph's spirit guided me to you in snow, perhaps it guides us still." Hannah wiped at her frozen tears, finding unexpected comfort in Thomas's perspective. It wasn't the Christian providence she had been raised to recognize, but it offered a sense of continuing connection that transcended death, a spiritual understanding that somehow made her impossible choice slightly more bearable. "I need time," she said finally, "to think, to be with hope." Thomas nodded, resuming their walk toward the teepee, where Hannah's daughter waited. "Time we have little of," he acknowledged, "but enough for Mother's heart to find its path." Inside, rising bears. Jippy, Hannah found her daughter still sleeping peacefully in her cradleboard. The elderly medicine woman had fallen asleep beside her, one weathered hand resting protectively near the infant. The simple tableau pierced Hannah's heart, a visual representation of the community that had embraced both her and her child when they had nothing and no one. Careful not to wake either sleeper, Hannah settled on her own bedding, her mind still churning with the impossible decision before her. She reached for Joseph's Bible, which she kept wrapped in soft leather beneath. Her sleeping furs. The deed tucked inside its pages had become both salvation and burden, proof that could save hundreds of lives but might require sacrificing her own connection to the life she had created. As she ran her fingers over Joseph's handwriting on the Bible's inside cover, Hannah found herself remembering their last night together before the massacre. They had sat beside their wagon's campfire, Joseph sketching rough plans for the cabin he intended to build on their claim. "It won't be much at first," he had acknowledged, his pencil outlining a simple one-room structure. "But we'll add to it as we go. A proper room for the little one when they arrive, maybe a front porch facing west to catch the sunset." Hannah had rested her head on his shoulder, her hand cradling her swollen belly. "It sounds perfect." "Not perfect," Joseph had corrected with a gentle smile. "But ours, something we build together, something that lasts." He had placed his hand over hers atop their unborn child. "This is what matters, Hannah, that we create something that continues after us, something good." The memory came with such clarity that Hannah could almost smell the campfire smoke, feel Joseph's solid warmth beside her. Something that continues after us, something good. Had he somehow known, even then, that their time together would be cut short? That their legacy would not be a homestead built by his hands, but a child who would have to find her way in a world more complicated than either of them had imagined? Hope stirred in her cradleboard, making the small snuffling sounds that usually preceded waking. Hannah moved quietly to kneel beside her daughter, watching as tiny eyelids fluttered open to reveal eyes gaining more definition each day, eyes that seemed to hold both Joseph's determination and Hannah's questioning spirit. "What would your father want me to do?" Hannah whispered, gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "Stay and keep you safe, or fight for the justice he deserved?" Hope's only answer was to grasp Hannah's finger with surprising strength, her tiny face serious as if contemplating the question herself. Rising Bear stirred from her shallow sleep, immediately alert despite her advanced years. "You decide," the old woman stated, not as a question, but as recognition of the weight Hannah carried. Hannah nodded slowly. "I think I have." The plan took shape over the next 3 days, refined through intense discussions that stretched late into the nights. Cooper and Davis contributed military perspectives, identifying potential patrol patterns and suggesting countermeasures. Thomas and the tribal warriors developed adaptations to the ancient moon sleds that would allow faster descent down the treacherous eastern pass. Hannah worked with Snowflower to alter clothing that would facilitate her disguise as a grieving army widow being escorted to safety. Throughout the preparations, Hannah spent every possible moment with hope, memorizing the feel of her daughter's weight in her arms, the scent of her skin, the pattern of her expressions. She spoke constantly to the infant, telling her stories of Joseph, of the home they had planned to build, of the brave and decent people who had saved them both. Rising Bear watched these interactions with knowing eyes, occasionally offering herbs to help Hannah maintain her milk supply during separation. Snowflower prepared special charms and medicine bundles, one for Hope to keep her connected to her mother, another for Hannah to carry her daughter's spirit with her on the dangerous journey. On the fourth morning, as dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains, the scouting party returned with news that accelerated their timeline. "Harper tests big guns," Running Elk announced grimly when the council convened. "Metal thunder shakes. Mountains even through snow. One moon too long to wait." Cooper nodded in confirmation after speaking with the scouts. "He's conducting range-finding exercises, working out the trajectories needed to hit the valleys." His expression was grim. Once he's satisfied with the calibrations, he won't wait for full thaw. The first clear day with stable conditions, he'll begin shelling. "How long?" Thomas asked. 2 weeks at most, Cooper estimated, less if the weather cooperates. The council fell silent as the implications settled over them. Their careful plans for a departure after the main thaw suddenly seemed hopelessly optimistic. "We must go now," Thomas finally stated, looking to Hannah for confirmation. "While snow still deep enough for moon sleds before Harper's gun's ready." Hannah's heart constricted at the abrupt acceleration, but she nodded firmly. "Yes, before we lose our chance entirely." Final preparations moved with urgent efficiency. The specially modified moon sleds, long, narrow conveyances reinforced with bone runners and leather hand grips, were brought from the craftsman's teepee for inspection. Provisions were packed, weapons checked, routes memorized. 4 warriors were selected to accompany Hannah, Thomas, and Cooper, each chosen for their limited English and ability to pass cursory inspection in military disguise. Davis would remain, behind with the other soldiers, both as continued assurance of good faith and to help prepare the camp for possible evacuation if the mission failed. The lieutenant had proven his sincerity by devising a complex series of trail markers that would allow Cooper to alert any returning tribal members to Harper's artillery positions and blind spots, should direct confrontation become necessary. As evening fell, with departure set for the coldest pre-dawn hours when snow conditions would be most favorable, Hannah faced her final night with hope. Rising Bear had prepared a special tea to help the baby sleep more deeply through her mother's absence, and had demonstrated repeatedly how she would feed the infant using a soft leather pouch filled with milk from one of the camp's nursing mothers. "She will thrive," the medicine woman assured Hannah as they sat together in the teepee's warm interior. "Strong spirit, this one. Knows her mother fights for her future." Hannah cradled Hope against her chest, inhaling the sweet scent of her downy head. "Tell her every day that I love her," she whispered. "Tell her I'll return as soon as I can." Rising Bear nodded solemnly. "Each sunrise, each sunset, she will hear your name. Your spirit stays with her even when body must go." Snowflower entered with the final items Hannah would need for the journey. Clothing layers designed for both warmth and quick disguise, Joseph's Bible secured in a waterproof pouch, and a small medicine bundle containing a lock of Hope's hair, wrapped in softest buckskin. "Wear this next to heart," Snowflower instructed, handing Hannah the bundle. "Keeps connection strong across distance." Her dark eyes shone with emotion she rarely displayed. "You are sister now. Your path is hard, but you walk it for all of us." Hannah accepted the bundle, deeply moved by this final affirmation of her place within the tribe. What had begun as rescue and obligation had transformed into genuine bonds of family and community, connections she had never expected to form, but now treasured beyond measure. Thomas appeared at the teepee entrance, his expression solemn. "Time for last preparations," he announced quietly. "We leave before first light." Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the knot of emotion in her throat. Gently, with reverent care, she placed Hope in Rising Bear's waiting arms. The old woman immediately began a soft, rhythmic chant, a protective blessing that Hannah had come to recognize during her months among the Lakota. "I will return," Hannah promised, pressing a final kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Wait for me, my little one." Outside, the camp had gathered in silent witness to their departure. Warriors stood with solemn dignity. Women held children close. Elders raised hands in blessing. Chief Running Elk approached, adorned with ceremonial feathers and paint that marked the gravity of the moment. "White woman came to us as stranger," he pronounced in careful English, his voice carrying to all assembled. "Goes now as Lakota, carries our future with her courage." He placed his hands on Hannah's shoulders, a gesture of profound respect from a chief to any tribal member. "May your path be clear, your spirit strong, your return swift." Hannah bowed her head in acknowledgement, accepting both the blessing and the responsibility it carried. When she raised her eyes again, they held the same determination that had kept her alive in the snow all those months ago, a will to survive, to bear witness, to create justice where cruelty had reigned. Dawn was still hours away when the small party gathered at the eastern edge of the camp. The moon sleds waited, packed with essential supplies and the carefully preserved blue uniform jackets that would form their disguise once they approached patrolled areas. Cooper checked each detail with military precision, while Thomas confirmed their route on a hide map one final time. Hannah stood slightly apart, her gaze fixed on Rising Bear's teepee, where her daughter slept, unaware that her mother was leaving. The separation felt like physical pain, a tearing away of something essential, yet beneath the agony lay purpose, a clarity of mission that Joseph would have understood and approved. "Ready?" Thomas asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. Hannah took a deep breath of the cold mountain air, filling her lungs with resolve. "Yes," she answered, turning away from the camp to face the steep, snow-covered pass that would carry them from safety into danger. "I'm ready." As they moved into position by the sleds, Hannah felt the medicine bundle Snowflower had given her press against her heart beneath her layers of clothing. Hope would remain with her in spirit, if not in body. And with that assurance, she took her place on the lead sled, Thomas positioned behind her for guidance and protection. With a silent signal from Cooper, the party pushed off into the darkness, the moon sleds gliding across the fresh snow with surprising speed and silence. The camp fell away behind them, swallowed by night as they ascended toward the narrower, steeper pass that few travelers ever attempted. Hannah didn't look back. Her gaze remained fixed forward toward the uncertain path ahead, a path that might lead to justice, to reunion with her daughter, or to final sacrifice in the name of truth. Whatever awaited, she would face it with the courage of both her worlds, the determined spirit of Hannah Miller and the newfound strength of a woman the Lakota now claimed as their own. The eastern sky showed the first hint of approaching dawn as they crested the initial ridge, the moon sleds leaving parallel tracks across pristine snow that would disappear with the next storm. Thomas pointed silently to the North Star, still visible despite the lightening horizon, their constant guide through whatever darkness lay ahead. Hannah nodded in understanding, feeling the weight of Joseph's Bible secured against her body, carrying evidence that might change the course of history for the people who had saved her. And in that moment, racing between earth and sky, with nothing but courage and truth as weapons against artillery and lies, Hannah felt a strange sense of rightness despite all that she risked. She had survived when no one else had. And now, that survival would finally find its purpose. The ascent through the eastern pass proved more grueling than any of them had anticipated. Twice they were forced to abandon the moon sleds and climb near vertical sections using rope and pitons, hauling their equipment behind them. Hannah's muscles screamed in protest, her body still recovering from childbirth, but she pushed forward without complaint. Each painful step carried her closer to justice for Joseph, for the massacred families, and for the Lakota who now faced artillery bombardment. By midday, they reached the pass's highest point. Thomas gestured for the party to take shelter in a small rock overhang as Cooper consulted his crude map. Harper's nearest patrol should be 5 miles southeast, the lieutenant reported, his breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. Once we begin our descent, we'll need to don the uniforms before we reach the tree line. Hannah nodded, conserving her energy as she sipped sparingly from a water skin. From their elevated position, the vastness of the territory spread before them, pristine, snow-covered wilderness that concealed both sanctuary and danger. Somewhere to the north lay hope, protected by Rising Bear's wisdom and the tribe's commitment. Somewhere to the south lay Fort Laramie, where Hannah's testimony might find sympathetic ears among officers who questioned Harper's methods. And somewhere between, Harper's men watched and waited. "Rest now," Thomas instructed, his dark eyes constantly scanning the horizon. "Descent more dangerous than climb." Hannah closed her eyes briefly, one hand touching the medicine bundle Snowflower had given her. Though physically separated from Hope, she felt her daughter's presence, a tether between them that transcended distance. "I will return to you," she whispered, a promise carried away by the mountain wind. The descent began as afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow. The modified moon sleds allowed them to cover ground with breathtaking speed, each rider controlling their direction with shifts in body weight and the occasional drag of a walking stick. Hannah had practiced extensively with Thomas during their preparation days, but theory proved far different from the reality of hurtling down a 40-degree slope with only leather hand grips between control and catastrophe. Halfway down, where the steepest section transitioned to a more gradual decline, Cooper signaled for them to halt in a small copse of pines. Here, they would make the transformation from Lakota war party to military escort. The warriors donned the salvaged blue uniform jackets over their traditional clothing, tucking braids beneath caps and smearing mud over facial paintings that couldn't be removed. Hannah exchanged her practical deerskin dress for the black mourning clothes of a settler's widow, complete with a thick veil that would conceal most of her features. "Remember," Cooper reminded them all, "keep conversation minimal. I'll do any speaking required. If challenged directly, respond with 'yes, sir' or 'no, sir' only." Thomas adjusted Hannah's veil with uncharacteristic tenderness. "Harper hunts. You most of all," he reminded her quietly. "Keep face hidden until Fort Laramie gates." She nodded, the veiled world suddenly dimmer, more confined. "And if we're captured?" Thomas's expression hardened. "We will not be taken alive." His hand briefly touched the knife at his belt, the same knife Hannah had once used to defend herself. "But we will not fail." The final leg of their journey brought them to flatter terrain, where the forest thinned and visibility increased. Dramatically, they abandoned the moon sleds, burying them beneath snow and branches, and proceeded on foot in military formation. Cooper took the lead, Hannah positioned in the middle, surrounded by protective escorts, Thomas bringing up the rear as a supposed tracker. They encountered the first patrol near dusk, 2 young soldiers on horseback who straightened to attention at Cooper's approach. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as the lieutenant smoothly explained their mission, escorting a massacre survivor to Fort Laramie at the personal request of Colonel Harper. "Didn't know there were survivors, sir," one soldier commented, his gaze moving curiously toward Hannah's veiled figure. "The lady's husband and child were killed," Cooper replied solemnly. "She witnessed everything before hiding. Colonel wants her testimony properly recorded at headquarters." The mention of Harper's authority worked precisely as intended. The soldiers offered directions to avoid the worst snowdrifts ahead, then continued on their patrol route without further questions. When they had disappeared from sight, Hannah released the breath she'd been holding. "First test passed," Cooper murmured, "but there will be others." They made camp that night in a sheltered ravine, keeping their fire small and smokeless. Hannah slept fitfully, her dreams filled with hope's face and the thunder of distant artillery. At dawn, they continued, southward, maintaining their military facade as they passed through increasingly patrolled territory. Their luck held until the third day, when they rounded a bend to find themselves facing a full squad, led by a captain Hannah recognized from the wagon train inspection, a man who would certainly remember her as well. "Lieutenant Cooper," the captain exclaimed, clearly surprised. "We were told your party was lost in the mountain ambush." Cooper maintained remarkable composure. "Nearly were, sir. Separated from the main force. Took shelter during the worst fighting. Been making our way back since, with civilians we discovered hiding from the hostiles." The captain's eyes narrowed as he studied the group, his gaze lingering on Hannah's veiled figure. "Remove your covering, ma'am," he ordered suddenly. "Security, protocols. Need to verify you're not Lakota." Hannah's blood ran cold. Thomas tensed beside her, his hand inching toward his concealed knife. Cooper stepped forward, positioning himself between Hannah and the captain. "Sir, the lady is in deep mourning. Her husband died protecting her from the massacre. Surely we can respect her grief." "Orders are orders, Lieutenant," the captain insisted, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Harper's been clear. Verify everyone." The moment balanced on a knife's edge, violent seconds away, their mission about to collapse. Then Hannah made her decision. With steady hands, she lifted her veil. "Captain Ellis," she stated clearly, "I believe you inspected our wagon before departure from Independence. I'm Hannah Miller. My husband Joseph and I were traveling to our land claim when your commanding officer's men attacked our train and left me for dead." Shock registered on Ellis's face as recognition dawned. "Mrs. Miller?" "But Harper said many things," Hannah interrupted, reaching into her coat to withdraw Joseph's Bible. "I have proof of what really happened at Eagle Pass. Legal land deeds showing we were authorized settlers, not trespassers. Evidence of who truly gave the orders that day." Ellis stared at her, then at the Bible in her hands, conflict evident in his expression. "Harper will deny everything." "Not to a formal military inquiry," Cooper countered. "Not when multiple witnesses testify." For a moment that stretched like eternity, Captain Ellis weighed his options, duty warring with conscience. Then almost imperceptibly he nodded. "My men and I will escort you personally to Fort Laramie," he announced loudly, then dropped his voice to add, "And God help us all when Harper discovers what we've done." 3 days later, Hannah stood in the Fort Laramie commander's office. Joseph's land deed spread across the desk between them. Colonel Richardson, a career officer with a reputation for strict adherence to military protocol, reviewed the documents with growing alarm. "These accusations against Colonel Harper are extremely serious, Mrs. Miller." "And entirely true," she replied steadily. "I witnessed everything, as did Lieutenant Cooper and Captain Ellis." Richardson's weathered face reflected the moral quandary before him, challenging a fellow officer versus allowing an atrocity to proceed. If what you say is true, and Harper has positioned artillery to shell native encampments indiscriminately, Then hundreds of innocent women and children will die, Hannah finished for him, including my daughter, who was born among the Lakota after they rescued me from certain death. The commander's head snapped up. Your child lives with the hostiles? With the people who saved us both when Harper's men left us to die. Hannah corrected firmly. I must return to her, but first Harper must be stopped. Richardson studied her face, seeming to measure her conviction. Finally, he nodded once, decisively. Captain, he called to Ellis, who stood at attention nearby. Prepare a full company. We ride north immediately with orders to secure Colonel Harper's artillery positions and place him under arrest pending investigation. As plans were made around her, Hannah moved to the fort's northern window, gazing toward the distant mountains where hope waited. Spring's first tentative warmth had begun to soften the snow, promising both renewed life and the possibility of return. I'm coming home, she whispered, her hand pressing against the medicine bundle that had never left her heart. Wait for me, little one. The truth has found its voice at last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.